Call the meeting to order. Welcome all to meeting number 42, the first panel of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance today. We are meeting on government spending, the WE Charity, and the Canada Student Service Grant. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. We're fortunate to have with us the Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary to the Cabinet in this first hour, Mr. Shugart. Welcome, sir. And I don't believe you have an opening statement. If you do, that's fine. If you don't, we will go to questions. And just a heads up for questioners. For members, the lineup for the first 6-minute round will be Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Fragascatis, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Jolien. Mr. Shugart, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. I'm glad to be here with you today. You're correct, Chair. I do not have an opening statement. I'm here to answer your questions to the best of my ability, and Chair, I would suggest we get right at it.
That sounds good. Where's Mr. Poilievre? Mr. Poilievre, are you ready to roll?
I am.
You're first up. 6 minutes. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Clerk Shugart, for your service to Canada. You are an excellent public service servant, and we're happy to have you here. Speaking of the public service, when it recommends a nearly $1 billion contribution agreement, does the public service do due diligence on the financial integrity of the recipient? That would be a yes or no.
In general, yes.
In this case of the WE Charity, Kate Behan of the Charity Intelligence said of WE Charity's finances, but when you scratch beneath the surface, there are lots of red flags. Did anyone in the public service raise these red flags?
Not to my knowledge, Chair. I would say that the due diligence is carried out primarily through the negotiation or the development of a contribution agreement, which was certainly done in this case. If there were obvious problems related to an organization that were related to the ability of the organization to carry out the objectives of the program, that would be.
But there were no red flags. So did anyone in the public service flag the publicly released audit that showed that WE Charity was in breach of a 2018 bank covenant?
Not to my knowledge, sir, no.
Did you discuss with the Prime Minister the WE Charity contribution agreement or the involvement of WE in this program before the proposal went to Cabinet?
I did not personally have those discussions, Chair. I think it would be helpful for the committee to understand, and I'll be very brief about this, that the clerk is not always in the room where
did anyone in the PCO
definitely.
On what dates?
There were briefings of the Prime Minister and PCO before Cabinet meetings. There was a briefing with the Prime Minister and PCO on May 21st. For example, there may have been an earlier discussion upstream in the development of the program with the Prime Minister. I'll have to get the date to you. I'm happy, by the way, Chair, to provide extensive documentation, including timelines, to the committee, which I'm sure will assist the committee in its work.
Thank you. So were we looking for all the dates on which the Prime Minister and any member of PCO discussed the Canada Student Service Grant or the WE Charity? Did you ever discuss the WE Charity or any of its related organizations with the Prime Minister, yes or no?
Personally, no.
Are you aware of any of your members of the PCO doing the same?
In the context of the suitability of a third party, and specifically the We Charity as the third party, this was part of the cabinet discussion, and yes, the PM was briefed by PCO on it.
How many ministers signed the memorandum to cabinet for this initiative?
This would have been one minister, if I remember correctly, Minister Chagger.
The lead public servant, we are told, in this matter was Madam Warnick, who works at Employment and Social Development. Why is it that the Minister for Employment and Social Development, Minister Qualtrough, refused to sign on to this contribution, this memorandum to cabinet?
I wouldn't use the word refused. It's because the Minister Chagger, is the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth. And this was a youth program, and the Department of Employment and Social Development supported that minister in the development of the program.
What is the name of the official who assigned Rachel Warnick to work on the Canada Student Service Grant?
It would have been the natural placement of responsibility as the senior ADM in that area of the department. The responsibility would naturally have fallen to her.
What was the name of the finance official who assigned Michelle Kovacevic to work on this file?
Same answer, Chair. This would have fallen within Michelle's responsibilities as the relevant ADM.
Did any member of the Prime Minister's staff raise the possibility with PCO that we could be the delivery organization for the Canada Student Service Grant?
To the best of my knowledge, Chair, the answer to that is no. There were discussions involving employment, social development, finance, the minister's offices of finance, and the Prime Minister's office throughout various aspects of the stages of the development of the proposal. But the proposal for the We Charity to be the third party partner was recommended to the government by Employment and Social Development.
And did any member
last question, Pierre.
I'm going to ask one more time as broadly as I can. Did anyone in the public service raise any red flags about the financial integrity, the financial practices, the financial sustainability, or any other problems related to the We Charity finances before this issue went to cabinet?
The answer, as far as I am aware, is no.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn now to Mr. Fragascatis, who will be followed by Mr. Fortin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shugart, for being here and for all your work, particularly during the pandemic. My first question relates to contribution agreements. Are contribution agreements reviewed by the PCO?
Your mic,
excuse me.
there you go.
Primarily, the responsibility for the contribution agreement would be the relevant department. But the broad lines of a contribution agreement might very well involve scrutiny by the Privy Council Office or the Department of Finance, or even frequently the Treasury Board Secretariat. I do know that along the way, the Privy Council Office did ask ESDC officials if there was any potential for a competitive process in this case, if the We Charity was the only appropriate vehicle for this contribution agreement. And ministers themselves, you'll appreciate that I won't go into detail, Chair, but ministers themselves at cabinet discussion raised issues about the capacity of the We Charity, about how it would reach out to underrepresented students to ensure reach right across the country, and various other matters, all of which would be reflected in the contribution agreement.
As part of the general scrutiny given by the Privy Council office that you mentioned, sir, is there a vetting process to ensure that decisions are not made with where there's a conflict of interest?
I wouldn't say, Chair, that there is a precise process or any established methodology. Every situation is unique. Every issue of conflict of interest or its appearance has its own unique context. In this case, the issue was not raised, as I indicated in response to Mr. Poilievre's questions. And I wouldn't say that in the contribution agreement or in the cabinet procedures that we went through that there was any particular provision for flagging conflict of interest.
Mr. Shugart, you've been a public servant for many years and made a great contribution throughout. I ask about the future of the Canada Student Service Grant here. With your experience seeing how programs go ahead or don't go ahead and the various issues related to that, what can we do here to ensure that the Canada Student Service Grant can go ahead? What is the future of the program in your view, and can it be offered? What can would-be student volunteers hope for at this point, and what can not-for-profit and charity organizations, in many ways on the front lines of the COVID-19 response, expect at this point? It's July. Is it late July, in fact, is where we're heading towards? Is it still, in fact, possible to offer a program along the lines of what the Canada Student Service Grant was envisioned to be?
6 of those public service career years were spent as the Deputy Minister of Employment Service and Social Development. In fact, I will not speak for officials in that department or in Minister Chagger's area of youth support, but my understanding is that there will be a program that will be stood up. It will take advantage of the I Want to Help platform that exists at ESDC. It will offer much less in the way of wraparound services to students. That is a consequence of the public service having to deliver the program. But from the beginning, the government has been concerned about the impact of the pandemic on students and is determined to provide whatever support through this program can be done. But it will, without question, be less than what was envisaged through the third-party delivery of the program.
Final question, Mr. Chair. Why was we chosen, Mr. Clerk? What about we particularly stood out? We've heard from others, including including PSAC, which we'll hear about, or from rather, later today, the Public Service Alliance of Canada, of course, that it should have been the public service that administered the program. What, in your view, stood out about we? Why were they uniquely placed to offer the administration of the program?
Well, I certainly understand and appreciate the vote of confidence, as one would expect from PSAC. And I generally agree entirely, of course, with the ability and the talent of the public service to deliver programs. And I think we have seen what the public service is able to stand up at relatively short notice. What we was able to provide, I understand, was the full range of services that would go to the heart of this matching program that would put young people in contact with not-for-profits so they could gain the relevant experience. Their ability to promote the program with a massive social media following, experience in other situations of matching young people to service opportunities. The department was not equipped to provide that. Existing database information, representation right across the country with partnerships with other charities and so on. These were all features that gave the onboarding and the matching elements of the program the capacity to be delivered. And as I've indicated in your earlier question, what we're dealing with now demonstrates that we was going to be able to provide a level of service that the public service could not by itself do, notwithstanding its best efforts and experience.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Mr. Fortin, who will be followed by Mr. Julian. Mr. Fortin, 6 minutes.
Sorry about that. Mr. Sugar, I was wishing you a warm welcome. I'm very pleased that you're here today. I would like to know, on your side, Mr. Sugar, you became aware of the We Charity offer of service when exactly?
Dans un sens général,
Generally speaking, Mr. Chair, I would say around the end of April.
I believe if you look at your little circle down below on language, you need to have it on the language you're speaking. You're coming through in both languages to me at the same level.
Thank you very much, Chair. With apologies to Mr. Fortin, perhaps it would be better if I just spoke in English, and that will save confusion of.
J'aimais bien la réponse en français, mais je voulais.
I would prefer the answer in French.
Yeah. Go ahead.
In English, or?
I think Mr. Fortin said he wanted it in French, but you're the witness. Go ahead. Your choice.
Okay. I'm having a little difficulty navigating the screen here, Chair. So I think for that reason, I will respond in English. I became aware of the involvement of We Charity in a general way. I hope the committee will appreciate that a vast range of issues were going on at a very intense time. The clerk is not involved in every file, and that was the case. In fact, in some of the briefings, colleagues were with the Prime Minister's senior PCO colleagues. So my involvement with this file directly was fairly limited until recent days.
Mr. Fortin.
Okay.
Yes, but you say that you did participate in meetings in April with regards to We Charities, and there were officials, senior officials present. So who were these senior officials? Do you have any names?
Avec qui vous avez eu ces...
Who did you have these discussions with?
From PCO, the Deputy Secretary who supports Cabinet, Philip Jennings, and also from PCO, the Deputy Secretary who is responsible for our operations, including many of the relationships with other departments, Tao Pham. Both of those officials, at least one or the other, would have been in all of the briefings with the Prime Minister.
Le Premier ministre participe.
The Prime Minister did participate in these meetings?
The Prime Minister, as will be shown by the timeline that I can provide the committee, was briefed prior to Cabinet meetings, and on at least one other occasion discussing the development of the program, options, the design features, etc.
But do you recall if he himself was personally participating, or was it his his executive assistant that was participating?
In the meetings to which I refer, Chair, I'm speaking about the Prime Minister.
So the Prime Minister was physically participating in these meetings, in these discussions with regards to We Charities. Is that what you're saying?
At that stage of the development, for example, when the recommendation was fully formed that we were recommending the We Charity as the third-party partner, yes, the Prime Minister was personally involved, of course.
Okay.
So when you received the offer of service from We Charity, were there any checks with regards to the financial health, the financial health of this organization?
Vous souhaitiez leur confier.
So you wanted to give a $900 million contract. I imagine that you checked and vetted this organization. It wasn't done haphazardly.
As I say in response to Mr. Poilievre's question, Chair, of course there would be scrutiny of any organization and its ability to deliver a program if it was envisaged that it would be the vehicle for that task. Issues of the financial.
Yes, but I'm talking about the specific cases. This specific case, was there a check, a credit check, a financial check on the ability of the financial situation of We Charity? And if so, who checked on this? Could you give us some specific things with regards to We Charity? I know in general you do this, but I'm talking about this case. Was it done in this case?
Well, as I indicated, Chair, no financial flags were raised through this process about the We Charity. To the best of my knowledge, officials did not engage in detailed scrutiny of the financial affairs of the organization. I stand to be corrected by subsequent testimony, but to the best of my knowledge, there were no detailed investigations of We Charity's financial affairs.
Mr. Fortin, last question.
Merci, Monsieur Shugart.
Monsieur Shugart, thank you. Was the Prime Minister or his executive assistant asking for any type of scrutiny with regards to the financial solvability of We Charities and their ability to manage this program? Either the Prime Minister or his executive assistant. Was this asked?
The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, given the scale of the program, did make the point, which was accepted by everyone, that due diligence and care needed to be exercised with regard to We Charity. Ms. Telford was not referring to financial integrity of the organization. Those issues, to the best of my knowledge, were not raised.
Okay, we will have to end it there. Mr. Julian, and he will be followed by Mr. Barrett. Sorry, Mr. Van, your mic's, there you go. Peter, you're up.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Shugart, for being here today. We hope you and your family remain safe and healthy through this period. You have said in your testimony that it was around the end of April in a general way that you became aware of the We proposal. Now, as we heard from testimony last week from Ms. Warnick, the We proposal arrived the same day that the Prime Minister actually announced the program. And Ms. Warnick gave in her testimony very clearly in reply to questions the statement that this public service was not aware of the details of the program and actually learned about it the same day. So when did you become aware specifically of the proposal from We? and the timeline that we need as part of this Finance Committee study. I would appreciate, I think we all would appreciate getting that as soon as possible. When did you first become aware of the WE proposal?
Well, personally, Chair, I'd have to say for the committee that it was not during that time at all that I personally was aware of the proposal from We Charity. Colleagues were, so I will answer the question in the context of the Privy Council office as a whole, if that is acceptable to Mr. Julian. My understanding is that it would have been around April 19th, 20th, but I can confirm this for the committee in the timeline. That is when the proposal would have been received by various officials in the government.
Sorry, are we talking about the first proposal or the second proposal? The second proposal from Ms. Warnick's testimony was received on April 22nd.
Okay, there was an earlier proposal, I understand, which came in early April, if I remember correctly. It related to an idea, a program that in the end was not funded.
Yes,
recommendation.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to move on. When was it the involvement of WE and all of the finances involved, including the $43 million that we would have received? When was that brought to Cabinet, and what discussions were held around recusal? Were you aware of the financial connection between the finance minister's family and the prime minister's family and WE?
There were two cabinet discussions, one by the COVID committee, and then secondly, ratification at cabinet near the end of May. We were not aware of any connection of the finance minister. The Prime Minister's involvement with the charity over a long period of time, of course, was in the public domain. And I must say that, of course, one of the standard means of dealing with conflict of interest, or the appearance of conflict of interest, is disclosure. So in a sense, the Prime Minister's involvement being in the public domain, I must say that it did not particularly cross my mind that there was anything that needed to be disclosed, because this was a well-known fact at the time. And I would also say, Chair, that given the importance of the issue to the government's overall efforts to deal with the impacts of the pandemic, and given the scale of the contribution, up to 900 million, I would emphasize for the committee, up to, I do not see a way that the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister responsible for public funds could not have had involvement in the policy development and in the approval of finances on this scale.
And we'll give you a little more time. That was a long answer, but I thought it needed to be articulated.
Well, thank you. I mean, thanks, Mr. Chair. We've heard that there was no financial flags, and I presume no evaluation of WE's financial circumstances. I gather as well from previous questions that there was no examination of the liability issues that Volunteer Canada raised with us last week. So there are tons of questions I think that folks want to ask on this. Now, you'll recall, Mr. Shugart, under the SNC-Lavalin controversy, The ethics commissioner said that he was unable to fully discharge the investigatory duties conferred upon me because you refused to provide information that the ethics commissioner had asked for. My question this time is, will you fully cooperate with the ethics commissioner or any request that the ethics commissioner makes for documentation and for answers on this controversy?
Within the bounds of my responsibility, Chair, of course I will cooperate with the Ethics Commissioner, as I would assert I did a year ago in relation to the previous issue. The committee will recall that the government itself had given a waiver of many of the cabinet confidences. I indicated to the Ethics Commissioner that in my judgment, there had been no demonstration of a greater public interest to weigh the cabinet confidences, and invited him to follow up with specific requirements that he might have. And the Ethics Commissioner engaged in no further follow-up. So I will absolutely cooperate with the Ethics Commissioner within the bounds of my responsibilities as Secretary to the Cabinet.
Last question, Peter, if you have a short one.
The short one is, are you aware that any other organizations were contacted? Volunteer Canada said that they repeatedly tried to speak with ministries about this. Were any other organizations even contacted to talk about this possible program and how to implement it? And was there any discussion around the alternative, which was, of course, to invest more resources in Canada's summer jobs, which has been cruelly underfunded at this time of pandemic?
I do know that early in the development of policy, meetings were held with a range of nonprofit organizations, voluntary organizations, and so on. We Charity was one of those consulted. We can provide you with the full list of organizations that were consulted. So I would say at the front end of this, it was a wide open process. It is true there was no call for proposals. It is true that there was no competitive process. I mentioned earlier that PCO raised the question of the department of whether there should be or could be a competitive process. The answer was no, with reasons, and we were colleagues at PCO were satisfied that was the case. Beyond that, Chair, I'm not aware of specific interactions of groups that sought the opportunity, but it was clear from my review of the file that ESDC, in cooperation with finance, examined the parameters of the program, the features that were desirable, and the conclusion was that We Charity had the necessary experience to meet the need.
Okay, we are going to end it there. We will certainly have time for 4 more questions of 5 minutes, maybe more. We'll start with Mr. Barrett, then Ms. Zerowitz. We will have a space for another Conservative MP in slot 3, and then Ms. Petrakis. Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Sugar, who has the authority to waive cabinet confidence? Is it just the cabinet themselves?
The convention is that the Secretary to the Cabinet has the authority to waive cabinet confidences. There is jurisprudence on this, as was clear from the SNC-Lavalin case. The Prime Minister himself, of course, can opt to waive cabinet confidence, but traditionally, that duty falls to the clerk, and there is jurisprudence on the criteria that the clerk has to follow on this.
Okay, thank you. So you talked about the standard in a conflict of interest being one of the criteria being disclosure. So did you know that members of the Prime Minister's family had been the beneficiaries or recipients of more than $250,000 up to $300,000 from WE?
I did not.
Okay. Would you be prepared to submit to the committee the media monitoring for the days following noted public appearances by Mrs. Margaret Trudeau and Mr. Alexandre Trudeau?
I see no reason why we would not support the committee that way.
Okay. Can you confirm that Rachel Wernick is at the point in her career where her next promotion would have to be approved directly by the Prime Minister?
If she were promoted to a governor in council position, that would be the case. But I can tell you that a public servant moving to another job within the public service, not involving a governor and council appointment, is often treated as a promotion. So not necessarily.
So you've said that, of course, public servants do their due diligence of groups getting large government contributions. In fact, you've said that this government contribution agreement was so big that in spite of the fact that the Prime Minister or Finance Minister could have any range of involvement, or their family members could have any range of involvement with an organization, but it's so big that they would have to be involved, So with a deal that's this big, how was it missed that there were breached bank covenants and a board responsible for the organization in shambles, in a word, and there were all kinds of real estate transactions that are now in the public domain that are questionable at best for an organization of this type? How could in that due diligence could something like that be missed?
That is entirely reasonable line of inquiry, of course, Chair. What I have said to the committee is that, to the best of my knowledge, those issues were not raised. What I also said, I repeat, that in the focus with respect to this contribution agreement had to do with the capacity of the organization effectively to deliver the program. That is what the due diligence related to. That is what the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff raised in saying this is on a scale that we should make sure that the organization can really deliver this, and that is what the subsequent focus on the through the contribution agreement concerned itself with. As to the other issues, I'm afraid I do not have the knowledge of the organization or recent events related to the organization. I can simply tell the committee that those issues were not on the table, to the best of my knowledge, at the time.
Last question, Mr. Baird.
It'll have to be multi-part, Mr. Chair.
Keep it short.
Okay, who in the PMO was aware of the details of the program before the April 22nd announcement, and did the Prime Minister know that the program was being awarded to WE before that April 22nd announcement?
No, he did not. The initial announcement was explicitly, if I remember correctly, included the Prime Minister indicating that further details would follow, that there would have to be further development of the program. This was the announcement by the Prime Minister that many of the gaps affecting students that had arisen as a result of the pandemic, the government fully intended to address those, and that there would be a program along these lines. At that point, the public service and presumably We Charity went to work in a vigorous way to design the program in detail, which was then brought forward in proposals by the minister to the COVID committee and later ratified by cabinet.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Ms. Zerowitz, and if somebody from the official opposition could give me a signal if they want on the next round. I don't have anybody on my list. Mr. Shugart never took time to lead off to take time, so there's more time for questions. Ms. Zerowitz.
I will take it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shugart. Thanks for being here today. Thank you so much for your leadership and service to our nation, especially during this unprecedented time. I want to start off by just going back to March and April, when the severity of the pandemic became obvious and the government of Canada was very focused on providing Canadians with as much help as possible. I just went through everything that was announced before April 22nd, and I literally have 4 pages of announcements. There was an unprecedented amount of work that was done by our civil servants to provide supports to the homeless, to the arts sector, to the business sector, to individuals, you name it. We introduced a whole number of programs. In terms of students, as you just mentioned, there was a huge concern about and the unevenness of what was available in terms of jobs and opportunities, and the ability for students to be able to continue to have financial means to be able to support their ongoing education. So on April 22nd, $9 billion was announced to support post-secondary students, and there are 4 key programs: the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, expanding more jobs in addition to CSJ, adjustments to Canada student loans and grants to make it far more generous. And this last segment was the Canada Student Service Grant, which was up to $912 million. It was meant as a way to provide an opportunity for students not only to actually volunteer and service in their community, but also help nonprofits, and in addition to also earn a little bit of extra money. And again, my understanding is there was a stacking element, so you could actually sort of have up to 3 of these components, so that we can give as much opportunities to students across this country, so that we could give them the best ability to be able to continue to work or continue to support their community, while also trying to raise some funds for their ongoing education. My question to you is around there's this false narrative around the fact that the federal government had set up the Canada Student Service Grant in order to provide an hourly wage for students. Can you please relate to the committee whether there was the intention to provide an hourly wage, or whether it was meant as part of an overall package, some additional support in a grant format?
My understanding, and I want to underline with the committee chair, I am not the file expert, and one of my many flaws is a non-encyclopedic memory. But my understanding is that this was intended to help provide for the needs of students who, because of the inability to have part-time work, or perhaps the support from families that had been affected by job loss, et cetera, they were not able to access the CERB, and they could very well be on hard times in terms of their own income. So in the form of a grant, as you say, this was intended to meet that financial need, but as part of an engagement, putting students who would otherwise have been studying to work in ways that they could make a contribution through nonprofits and support to the community and so on during the pandemic. Might point out that one of the criteria, one of the requirements of the We Charity was to be able to support this kind of thing in a safe way, so that the public health goals of limiting the spread of the pandemic would be supported and attended to through this vehicle.
So it was never meant to be an hourly wage, just an additional support and one of many number of different things that the government was introducing to try to support students.
Well, I stand to be corrected by officials in the relevant departments, but that is my understanding. You're correct.
Last question, Julie.
And then you also introduced, well, it's two-part, Mr. Chair. You had also indicated that the PM was personally involved in the discussions of WE once they were recommended by the civil servant. And this is not untypical. This happens to all major programs, and it's typical. If you could confirm that. And I think the other thing I think it's really important for us to have on record is that the Prime Minister has apologized for not recusing himself from the cabinet decision when it came to cabinet to finally approve WE. So while it's absolutely typical to actually be involved in the discussions around big programs such as this Canada Student Service Grant, I think the Prime Minister did indicate that it was he should have recused himself from the actual final decision at cabinet.
You're correct. He has said that on the record, and that was his decision to convey that. I do repeat, I don't know how the Prime Minister, and let's remember we're talking about the former Minister of Youth here, could have not been involved in understanding the development of a program of this importance and of this scale.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Mr. Poilievre will be followed by Ms. Kotrakis, and Ms. Goudreau. We'll have time for a question from you, I'm sure. Mr. Poilievre, 5 minutes.
Do you commit to releasing all of the communications between PMO staff and PCO with regards to the Canada Student Service Grant and the WE Charity Contribution Agreement?
I believe the committee should have access to as much of this information as possible.
That would be a yes. You will proactively submit that to the committee clerk. Thank you very much for that. Secondly, could you commit that you do the same for all communications from the Finance Minister's office to PCO and to the Finance Department?
I will do that.
Thank you. Next, in previous testimony from Ms. Wernick, I asked her who is it that told her to reach out to WE in order to deliver this program. She gave the name of a Finance Canada official, Michelle Kovacevic, who apparently convened a meeting across departments. Were you aware of this mid-April meeting?
I wasn't, Chair. Whether officials at PCO would have been aware at that point of the development, I do not know.
Do you know now? Do you know if there were any PCO officials in attendance at that meeting?
I can verify, but I don't believe so. But
can you commit to releasing the names of all the participants in the meeting and finding out if there are any notes from the meeting that and releasing those to the committee as well?
We'll include that in what we provide.
Thank you. And if the meeting took place by Zoom, can you check if there is a recording of that meeting and commit to releasing that recording to our committee as well?
If there is such a thing, we can provide all of that. My intention, Chair, is to be as expansive as possible in the information we provide to the committee.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question I have is back to this issue of due diligence. You confirmed that the public service does perform due diligence when it awards large-scale contribution agreements. This was a $1 billion contribution agreement. Now, but you indicate that somehow or another your officials missed the fact that we, the recipient of the contribution, had reached a bank covenant, that its entire board had resigned, and presumably it missed the fact that the organization and its affiliates had somehow accumulated $40 million of real estate. Even though it is not a real estate business. Who in the public service ought to have performed and reported on this due diligence?
That ought assumes that there was a failure of duty, and I'm not prepared to accept that assertion. I do not know what information was available to whom on the broader dealings of the organization, which I understand is a complex organization. I can only repeat for the committee chair that
Right.
the due diligence of the public service related to the ability
To
of
deliver.
We Charity to deliver this program.
Right, and that would doing that due diligence would have required reading the financial statements, correct?
If that were relevant to their ability to deliver this program, that may be the case.
Well, you'd have to read the financial statements to know if the organization had the financial capacity to administer a program of this scale. Did anyone in the public service read the financial statements of WE before allegedly recommending that it be given delivery of this program?
Well, I think the answer to that question is encompassed within my earlier answer. I don't have any further information.
Right, because if they had read the financial statements, they would have found that WE was in breach of its bank covenants, and that would have been right there staring the official in the face. It seems hard to believe that no one would have alerted the government to these facts about the WE organization. Finally, did the Prime Minister indicate to you when you discussed this matter, this WE contract, this WE contribution agreement with him, that whether or not he had spoken to any member of WE or its affiliates or its representatives before the proposal went to Cabinet?
There is absolutely no evidence, no suggestion in anything that I have reviewed that would suggest that the Prime Minister had any interaction with the We Charity in relation to this program. None whatsoever.
What about
Thank
his
you
staff
both.
members? What about his staff members?
Same issue as far as I know. Chair.
Thank you both. We will now turn to Ms. Koutrakis, and then we'll have time for one question from Ms. Goudreau and maybe one from Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr.
Koutrakis.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shugart, for being here with us today. Last week, we heard from Ms. Wernick, and in her testimony, she said that the public service agreed that the We Charity was the only organization to deliver the student service grant. With this in mind, it makes sense then that the Cabinet would try to deliver the program as quickly as possible given the exceptional circumstances that we are all currently facing. Was a contribution agreement the most effective way, in your opinion, to quickly deliver the CSSG? And is there anything unethical about delivering a program through a contribution agreement?
Absolutely not. Contribution agreements are a vehicle that governments, going back as far as I can remember, have used to achieve public policy purposes in a transparent way that is subject to audit, which this agreement was and is. So they are a standard vehicle. There are standard provisions in contribution agreements. They will vary from case to case depending on the nature of the program being delivered. But they are absolutely a proven vehicle, and there is nothing unethical about using a partnership agreement with a third party to achieve public policy and public administration objectives. None whatsoever.
And can you expand, please, on what steps are taken to get a program through the Cabinet process?
Well, it all depends on the program and the nature of it. But in brief, a minister proposes something, sponsors the proposal, so to speak. That will have been developed by public servants with input, again, depending on the case, from stakeholders. Again, going back decades, governments of all stripes have engaged with stakeholders through their own political offices and through public servants, have received proposals, have asked for proposals. It is a very, very dynamic process. That will result in a proposal that public servants will sign off on. It will go typically to a committee of cabinet for scrutiny. And then if the recommendation is positive, or even if it is disputed but still has life, it will go to full cabinet for ratification. Different governments will vary the process somewhat according to the procedures that the head of the government puts in place, but generally speaking, that is the process that is followed. During the COVID pandemic, there have been amendments to the process. There has not always been the luxury of time. Cabinet, of course, it was meeting less frequently than it normally would. The COVID committee, which is an ad hoc committee chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, was meeting far more regularly than any committee normally would. So there were variances related to the nature of the crisis, but in general, that would be the process.
And in general, is it common for the civil service to consider multiple organizations, but only recommend one organization to cabinet?
It would depend on the facts of the case, and if there were, and let's use our imaginations here, a wide variety of organizations, and if there were time to do it, there might very well be a formal competitive process. There could be a call for proposals and a formal competitive process. There's been a wide variety, and by the way, the We Charity was not the only third party that the government turned to during the pandemic crisis to support these public objectives. The Canadian Red Cross, the United Way, Centraide, other organizations were turned to provide the expertise and the reach that the public service does not itself have. Let's bear in mind that our system may have the public service at the federal and provincial and municipal levels at the center of providing public services, but it's part of a complex system of civil society, organizations supporting these objectives, and the public service may be admirable, but it's not everything. And so this is a normal part of doing business. That is not to say, Chair, that the nature of the committee's inquiry is trivial or should not be followed up. But this is a standard means of doing business, and in this case, the public service professionally concluded that this organization was best placed and indeed uniquely placed, for reasons I mentioned earlier in our meeting, to deliver these objectives, and all of the decisions associated with it were consistent with that conclusion.
Sorry, Annie, we're out of time there. I do want to just follow up a little on that, on the steps on the cabinet process. Having been in cabinet myself, usually there's three options come to cabinet in my time anyway. Now with COVID, no doubt there's more streamlining as out of necessity. Would other options beyond we have been there? You did mention United Way, you did mention Red Cross. Would there be a preferred option and other options considered, and why they didn't see fit to go with them?
Well, Chair, you're revealing our technique that we often provide ministers with an unacceptable option, another unacceptable option, and the right option. I'm making light of it, of course, and I want to be clear to the Canadian public about that. Again, the facts will determine the situation. I do not believe that options were provided in this case because the lines of the program, broadly speaking, had already been announced by the Prime Minister as being the government's objectives to deal with this issue. So what was recommended to Cabinet followed those lines. They represented the further elaboration of those program features. And similarly, in the absence of other options in the public service's best judgment about the delivery vehicle, the We Charity was the only recommendation made, but with the rationale that they were uniquely placed, in our opinion, to deliver many of the features of the program. Now, as I said, in the Cabinet discussion, ministers did raise issues of due diligence. So that part of the process was followed as it would be in any other case, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I did promise Ms. Goodrow and Mr. Julian one more question each. We'll be a little bit over. Ms. Goodrow.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. We've made several observations, and thank you very much, Mr. Shugart. We've heard that there was due diligence that was done, but my question is quite simple. On one hand, you said that it's important for you to recognize that you needed to choose an organization able to respect the contribution agreement. And earlier on, we spoke of the possibility of having of contracting with an organization that was in a good financial position. Can we have a copy of the due diligence or the scrutiny of the financial statements?
If there are relevant documents in that regard, Chair, I would be happy to have them provided to the committee. I think it would be appropriate for the committee to see the contribution agreement itself with We Charity. I would have no objection to the contribution agreement being made available, and I cannot imagine that We Charity would have any objection either.
Thank you, Mr. Shugart. We'd appreciate receiving that contribution agreement, and we do of the Kielburger brothers.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, I think that there's a misunderstanding. She was asking for the due diligence and not the contribution agreement. Of course, we want that, but what she asked for is the report showing due diligence. I'm not sure he understood that.
We'll come back to Ms. Shugart to if
Chair.
you can answer along that line, and then we'll go to Mr. Julian.
Chair, I understood perfectly, and I undertook to provide both.
Okay, thank you very much. Then Mr. Julian, last question, if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Shugart, earlier you made what I thought was a quite surprising comment about the size of the financial decision meant that you didn't see how the finance minister and the prime minister could have recused themselves. This is quite a surprising comment. So is it the position of the PCO that there's a limit to where the conflict of interest code would apply? At what level is that? If $1 billion of taxpayers' money is too much for a minister to recuse themselves, at what level is that no longer a consideration? Is it 50 million? Is it 1 million? Could you please clarify your remarks?
In fact, I'll repeat them, Chair. What I said was that I could not imagine how the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance could not have been involved as part of this process. I did not refer specifically to recusal at Cabinet. I indicated that this was a fundamental policy issue for the government. I do not see how the Prime Minister could have nothing to do, no knowledge of the development of the policy that would meet the needs of students impacted by the pandemic. And for the finance minister, given responsibility for the finances of the country, given the significance of the expenditure here, up to $900 million, an initial tranche of in the order of 500 million, that at some stage the Minister of Finance would, in my judgment, have to be aware of the scale of a program or the existence, the development of a program of that scale. I make no judgment whatsoever about the Prime Minister's comment on his non-recusal, and I make no judgment about the Finance Minister's comments in that regard either.
Okay, we will have to end it there. I think we had a fruitful hour's discussion with the Clerk of the Privy Council and Mr. Shugart. Thank you very much for your appearance today. There's a number of documents I think that you've agreed to provide to committee, and I think you're well aware there's also a motion from committee looking for documents by sometime in early August. Some of them will be the same, I'm sure. So thank you very much for your attendance today and your answers to our questions. With that, we will suspend to bring on the next panel. We'll suspend for a couple of minutes and then go to a group of individuals from the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Meeting suspended. Welcome witnesses to meeting number 42, the second panel of the House Standing Committee on Finance today. We are, as you know, meeting on government spending, We Charity, and the Canada Student Service Grant. And today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available via the House Commons website. With that, we will start off. We have first two individuals and then the Public Service Alliance of Canada. So we'll start, and I believe one doesn't have remarks. I just slipped in my mind who that is, but we'll start with Mr. Lapointe, President, Focus OSBL Consulting Service. Mr. Lapointe, yes. The opening remarks. Go ahead.
You just gained 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lapointe, for that. And then we'll turn to Joshua Mandyke, Labor and Class Action Lawyer, Goldblatt Partners, LLP. Mr. Mandyke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. My remarks are focused on concerns that the Canada Student Service Grant raises regarding potential volunteer misclassification and the exploitation of students and recent graduates. I also want to speak about how this program can be salvaged. These are concerns which strike at the core of the program rather than the question of by whom it is administered. And before I begin, I just want to briefly introduce myself and my experiences with these issues. So my name is Josh Mandyke. I'm a labor and class actions lawyer at Goldblatt Partners. My class actions practice is focused exclusively on employment class actions involving wage theft, unpaid overtime, and other issues of non-compliance with employment standards legislation. Many of these cases are national class actions, and a number of these cases involve claims of the misclassification of employees, whether it be as independent contractors, student athletes, interns, or volunteers. And prior to my time as a lawyer at the firm, I was actively involved in the fight for the rights of interns and other student workers, first as the co-chair of an organization called Students Against Unpaid Internship Scams, and then later on as the executive director of the Canadian Intern Association. And my engagement with issues regarding volunteer misclassification has continued into my work as a lawyer at Goldblatt Partners, including by launching what I believe to be the first volunteer misclassification class action in Canada. And it's with that background that I come to you to share my concerns with respect to the Canada Student Service Grant. And in particular, the program raises concerns with respect to potential employee misclassification for participants, for charities and NGOs, and for the government itself. First, the program potentially exposes its participants to workplace exploitation and misclassification. The question of whether someone is a true volunteer is a legal determination which rests on more than simply whether the hiring entity says they're a volunteer. And this program raises legitimate concerns as to whether these individuals are true volunteers. Second, this arrangement potentially exposes charities and not-for-profit organizations to potential liability for wage and hour claims, whether it be through employment standards complaints, small claims court actions, or even potential class actions brought by the so-called volunteers participating in the program. And finally, the Government of Canada itself could potentially find itself entangled in these legal disputes, either as an alleged common employer or as an alleged labor supply agency, given its role as paymaster and given its role in connecting volunteers with placements through the I Want to Help portal. But aside from these legal concerns, the Canada Student Service Grant also raises concerns about fairness and about the type of support the government should provide for students and recent graduates. And these concerns include the following. First, the rate of pay provided through the program is significantly less than minimum wage under the applicable employment standards legislation. And setting aside the legality of that arrangement, it raises fairness concerns and it sends a message that the government doesn't value these workers' labor. Second, mandatory volunteer placements are far inferior to paid employment in terms of the doors they open up and in terms of what that work experience means for a young worker on their resume. To the extent one of the goals of this program is to support students and recent graduates in their career paths by ensuring that they have meaningful summer work experiences, the program as structured fails to deliver. Fourth, the program is seemingly at odds with the government's own efforts to crack down on the exploitation of workers through unpaid internships, including the standards for work integrated learning regulations, which are set to come into force in September 2020.
Would it be possible, Mr. Chair, to just ask the witness to slow down a little bit? Because the translators can't follow. They're reading full speed. Thank you.
I'll slow down. You're muted.
Okay, go ahead, slow down.
Will do. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, fourth, the program itself is seemingly at odds with the government's own efforts to crack down on the exploitation of workers through unpaid internships, including the standards for work integrated learning activities regulations, which are set to come into force in September 2020. And finally, this program places onerous demands on students who are expected to work 500 hours between June 25th and October 31st in order to obtain the full $5,000 grant. This translates into working more than 50 hours per week between June 25th and the end of August if someone were to try and hit the 500 hours before the school year starts, or it would translate into working more than 27 hours per week every week from the start of the program on June 25th until the end of October. And the latter arrangement potentially interferes with these students' studies during the first 2 months of school. And these concerns about the obligations this places on students are heightened given the unique financial, family, and childcare obligations Canadians are facing during the COVID-19 crisis. And for all of these reasons, the Canada Student Service Grant has serious design flaws that give rise to the exploitation and to the potential misclassification of students and recent graduates, and it is in need of a serious overhaul. At this point in time, the best way to try and salvage the program would be to completely remove the mandatory volunteerism requirement, to convert the existing positions into paid jobs through the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and to expand and build up the Canada Emergency Student Benefit to CERB levels and to extend it to international students. And those are my remarks. I welcome your questions regarding these matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mandryk, and we'll turn to Mr. Alward, National President, Public Service Alliance of Canada. And I would say before you start, Chris, that we do want to recognize the hard work, long hours, different work situation that the public service has followed to assist the government and Canadians in dealing with the COVID pandemic. So I want you to know on behalf of the committee that we really appreciate the efforts that have been made there. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Easter, and thank you, committee, for the invitation to appear today. The Public Service Alliance of Canada represents over 200,000 workers. 150,000 of those workers work in the federal public service and in federal agencies. We also represent 40,000 members in the post-secondary education sector. Some of these members would be eligible for the new Canada Student Service Grant. And we certainly understand the need for a program to assist students. However, this program and the process to establish it are seriously flawed. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down most of the economy in March. Reopening the economy has been cautious, as it should be. However, this has had a serious impact on potential earnings for young people who are either on the verge of starting their post-secondary education or have recently graduated. The goal of the Canada Student Service Grant Program is to provide them with earning opportunities. While the program was announced on April 22nd, the announcement that We Charity would be given the contract to administer it was not made until June 25th. It appears that We Charity was advised 2 weeks earlier that it would receive the contract. The Prime Minister has claimed bureaucrats had determined We Charity was the only feasible option to deliver the student grant program. Subsequent events have raised questions about how
Mr. Aylward, just to, could you lower your mic a little? I understand it's coming through a little crackly for the translators. Just lower it a little further from your lips.
Okay, is that
Thank you.
any better? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Subsequent events have raised questions about how the decision was actually made. We ask why the Federal Public Service was not directed to administer the student grant program in the first place. At one point, the Prime Minister claimed that We Charity was the only organization capable of delivering the program on the scale that was needed. Yet, a significant portion of the grant program budget, $43.5 million, would have gone directly to We to ensure their organization could deliver the program. The size of the program, $912 million, is a very large amount for any organization to administer across all provinces and territories and in all regions of the country. The successful rollout of the much larger Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CER program, was done in a very short order and proved the public service capable of adapting to meet new demands and moving quickly to do so. While the government has argued the student grant program needed to be turned around quickly, it took almost 2 months to even announce who would receive the contract. Today, 3 months later, the program is still not in place. And while the program was scheduled to run until October 31st, students will have more difficulty accumulating the necessary hours to actually receive any grant money. If the program had been turned over to the public service to organize a delivery system, it is likely students would now be receiving some actual benefit. For example, the student loans program could have been adapted to expand eligibility and include grants equal to the funding allocated to the student service grant program. The infrastructure was in place, and this would have gone a long way to alleviating students' concerns about how to pay for tuition, materials, food, and lodging while they study. It would have also supported students who may have to defer their continuing education for financial reasons due to the pandemic. I suspect that if the program is going ahead, it will be turned over to Employment and Social Development Canada, as it should have been from the start. In addition to questioning why the government decided to contract out this program, we are concerned about the premise of the program, which would pay volunteers. We see this as just another example of young people being forced to accept precarious work at poverty-level wages. The payments are calculated using 100-hour thresholds for each $1,000 grant. That's a wage of $10 an hour, which isn't even minimum wage. Minimum wages are at least $11 an hour and higher across the country. For example, in Ontario, it's $14 an hour.
Mr. Aylward, I reluctantly hate to interrupt again, but just bring your mic down a little. There, the mic itself. Yeah, and let's give that a try. The difficulty of the virtual meetings is the people in the booths have to be able to hear extremely clearly, and if it's crackling, it's a problem. So try now. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No problem. And my apologies, certainly, especially to the interpreters in the booth. Students may actually end up making even less than $10 an hour. The grant will be calculating using 100-hour thresholds and will be rounded down. Students need to work a full 100 hours to get any money at all. If they work more than 100 hours, but less than 200, they are providing free labor for the additional hours. It's also ironic that the federal government has brought in regulations under the Canada Labour Code to restrict the use of unpaid internships. Yet, it is expecting students to work unpaid hours under the student grant program. Paying students to carry out volunteer work means they are no longer volunteers. Simply calling them volunteers will not protect the government or the organizations employing them from violating provincial labor standards. PSAC agrees that students need support during this difficult time. What they don't need is a program that shortchanges them for their labor. The government could have organized a program to pay students to work for nonprofit agencies and charities carrying out duties that volunteers could not do, or to perform work that would not be done due to a shortage of volunteers. They could have been paid at least minimum wage for their work, but ideally a wage more closely aligned to the type of work they were performing. and they could be paid for all their work. For that matter, why introduce a grant program that emphasizes volunteer experience as opposed to job experience? The government could have taken immediate action to bolster existing summer student employment programs, including the Federal Student Work Experience Program. Finally, and let me conclude, if the government had either used existing programs or asked the public service to set up a new student work and payment plan, it would have avoided the conflict of interest issues that have come to light since the We Charity announcement and been able to deliver both pay and work experience to students. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three witnesses, and I believe you have Mr. West, Howie West, with you, who's Work Reorganization Officer, National Programs Section. If there's any questions, need to be transferred to him. So our question list is Mr. Cooper first, Ms. Zerowitz, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Julian. Mr. Cooper, you're up.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Alward. Just so I understand, putting aside design flaws with the Canada Student Service Grant, it's your position that the public service could have administered this program in a timely manner. Do I understand you correctly in that regard?
Yes, Mr. Cooper, absolutely. I mean, the public service right now administers hundreds of grants, everything from agriculture to scientific research. And certainly, I think we demonstrated very clearly during the outstart of this pandemic that we were able to adapt very quickly, such as as I said, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. How quickly we were able to get that out the door. So I think the public service has proven itself very capable, accountable, and certainly absolutely been able to administer this program.
And consistent with that, the public service already administers a wide variety of programs targeted at youth. Is that not correct?
Yes, it is, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of programs for students and for youth, as well, as you pointed out, that are administered within the federal public service.
And that would include matching youth with not-for-profits. Obviously, the Canada Summer Jobs Program comes to mind.
Yes, exactly, and I made reference of that in my statement. Sure.
And so, what do you say in response to Ms. Wernick's testimony from the other day, in which she said, and I quote, "The pandemic was also impacting the capacity of the department, meaning ESDC, for any form of direct delivery," close quote. What do you say in response to that?
I mean, I'm not too sure what the basis of that statement may have been. I'm not privy to that. All I can say is that we have demonstrated throughout this pandemic that the public service certainly are very capable of being able to produce programs and being able to benefit Canadians when in times like this. And as I said, I'm very confident that within the public service that this new student service grant would have been administered with very little complexity to it, and certainly with transparency and ease. And again, I just want to reiterate about the accountability of doing it within the public service.
And in terms of testimony from Mr. Shugart earlier today, he cited reasons for going to a third party and claimed that only we supposedly had the ability to provide what he characterized as the full range of services under the program, including social media, matching, database information, and connecting not-for-profits, connecting with not-for-profits across Canada. Do you have anything to say in response to that?
Of the things that you just listed,
yes.
Mr. Cooper, I can't see any of those not being able to be performed within the federal public service.
Okay. And why do you say that?
Because they already are. They already are administering such things as you just announced.
Okay. And isn't it the case that the public civil service has actually provided, as you noted, a rapid response to a number of COVID-related procurement projects and did so with open competition.
I mean, absolutely. We certainly did a very quick turnaround, as I said, on CERB, absolutely, and including the emergency wage subsidy as well. Those two programs were delivered by federal public sector workers, as I said, seamlessly, I believe.
And I'm looking at another program, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. Request for proposals was issued in respect of the economic impact of the pandemic. Proposals were issued, closing date of 6 days, and 20 companies submitted bids, and within a few days, the winner was announced. So there are many examples, are there not?
I can't comment specifically on what you just announced. But
that's fair enough. But would you say? I think it's significant, but you note that it's 3 months later and we still don't have a program.
Yes, which is obviously the only people who that is being detrimental to, of course, are the students who are relying on this program.
Now, I want to turn a little bit now to contribution agreements. Would you say, in your experience, that it would be normal for a contribution agreement of this size, dealing with the large amounts of money that would be administered, to do this without any kind of competitive process?
Well, as I said, I mean, when the Prime Minister announced that We Charity was the only organization capable, and then you look and realize that $43.5 million was being given to We to ensure that they were able to administer the program, one would have to question that. Absolutely.
And you know,
question, Michael, but will you raise your mic a little bit? The interpreters are just there. That's better. Great.
Well, are you aware of any program of this sort that is provided by way of a third party? You noted in your testimony that a $900 million program to source this out to a third party was unusual. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, as I said, I mean, with this kind of program, it's already being administered within the federal public service, along with many others as well. So when we seen that this particular one was being contracted out, we had to ask why. Why is this being contracted out? Why should any federal program be contracted outside, as I said, of the capable, accountable, transparent federal public service?
Okay, we will have to end that round there. We'll turn to Ms. Zurowitz, followed by Mr. Fortin. Julie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the presenters for today. My first question is to Mr. Mandryk. Mr. Mandryk, would you not agree that because of COVID-19, the federal government is operating in unprecedented times?
Yes, of course.
And are you aware of many of the federal government emergency programs that have been introduced to help broad groups of Canadians during these unprecedented times, like the CEBA program, CERB, the rent subsidy programs? Are you aware of those programs?
I am aware of those programs, and I'm aware that students were initially excluded from CERB, and that might have contributed to the rush in having to put this together.
Thank you. So I wanted to just, so I want to sort of ask those two questions. We had just heard from the clerk of the Privy Council prior to this panel, and we heard that when the student programs were introduced, the $9 billion, there were 4 major programs that were introduced, and the intention of this government was to provide, because of how students were disproportionately impacted across this country in different regions, we were trying to provide as many work opportunities, as many opportunities for students to engage in their local communities, support the COVID efforts, as well as to provide as much financial support as possible, because we knew that there was a lot of stress about how was it that students were going to be able to continue to pay for their education moving forward. So we heard that the Canada Student Service Grant was not a student service program, was not meant to be an hourly wage. It was meant to be a grant, and it was part of a big package during these unprecedented times for us to be able to support our students. The second thing I want to mention is that we heard from Ms. Spivak from Volunteer Canada, who indicated to us that there's a difference opinion within the nonprofit sector in terms of whether grants and stipends should be provided at certain times to volunteers. And the last thing I want to mention is that Minister Chagar, in a previous panel, had indicated to us that she felt very confident that the bureaucrats who were responsible for the Canada Student Service Grant had ensured a proper legal opinion to ensure that everything was set within the laws. But I wanted to end, Mr. Mandarich, just by indicating a huge thanks to you. You've made a number of recommendations, and our civil servants right now have the program in hand, and I think that your recommendations are going to be very helpful. I actually want to turn my attention to Mr. Alward, and I want to be able to say, Mr. Alward, and I hope I say your last name correctly. I just want to say, you can't imagine, I think, the heartfelt thanks that Canadians have for our public servants. If there was ever a time that we were so enormously proud, it would be right now. The amount of programs that they've been able to introduce during these unprecedented times, and most of them not in their offices, from their homes, and making do with whatever they possibly are able to do. I know that there's enormous gratefulness from all Canadians. I wanted to just ask you, Mr. Shugat, the clerk of the Privy Council, had just indicated to us that it's absolutely normal for the federal government not to deliver all programs, that it's very typical and indeed very effective for us to actually go to a number of nonprofits to actually deliver programs. So, for example, food security programs, which is very big in Davenport, the Community Food Centres of Canada would deliver that. And I wonder whether you agree that in some cases it is more effective for us for the public servants to actually work with various nonprofits to deliver programs.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, certainly from time to time, it probably would be advantageous for the government and for those nonprofits to do such work. But the oversight of that work still has to be maintained within the public service. And I would suggest that what you're saying is should be the exception rather than the norm, for sure. Because as I said, why would you want to contract out anything outside of the federal public service, outside the accountable, transparent, capable public service? And normally, with a few exceptions, normally that work cannot be done more efficiently once you contract it out.
And back to you, Ms. Sirowitz, but move your mic. It's a bad mic day, not a bad hair day. So move your mic out a little. It's popping. Okay,
Mr. Chair, I had about two minutes of statements put to me, and I never had an opportunity to respond to them before it was turned to another speaker. Can I have an opportunity to respond to the various assertions that were put to me?
Yes, you can answer, and then we'll give Julie her last question. Go ahead.
Thank you. So the suggestion that there's a difference of opinion with respect to the payment of volunteers, I'd like to say, first off, if I was allocating a $900 million program, I wouldn't want to be resting on a difference of opinion as to the legality of it. But when we're talking about this difference of opinion about whether it's okay to pay volunteers, let's be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about Johnny is coming into the shelter to help people, and he has to take the bus here. Is it okay if we pay for a bus pass for him, or can we buy him some tokens? Susie is coming to help us with our charity barbecue. Can we feed her afterwards? Can we give some sort of small token to reward her? We're not talking about it in the scope of giving students $5,000 at $10 per hour or less. Not these sort of massive structured sub-minimum wage payments. Like this is not within the scope of the debate.
Ms. Sirowitz, last question.
Thank you so much. I just want, Mr. Aylward, I just want to sort of ask you very quickly, just because I don't want Canadians to be left with the impression that that what was proposed by our excellent bureaucrats in terms of a contribution agreement with whether it's We Charity or anyone else, that there wouldn't have been proper key deliverables and accountability mechanisms. We've heard from the clerk of the Privy Council as well as from our other senior bureaucrats that contribution agreements are absolutely typically done. They're done, in this case, it was done because it was a short time frame, and it was also because there was very specific requirements. But I don't want to leave Canadians with any impression that there would not have been key deliverables and key accountability mechanisms in place. Would you agree that that is the case with the contribution agreement?
Well, look, I mean, what I would turn my mind to is that if it's the only organization, and any organization, if you say it's the only organization capable of doing this, and then you have to provide $43.5 million to ensure that that organization is able to deliver that program, that's what I think needs to be questioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Mr. Fortin, followed by Mr. Julian. Mr. Fortin. Your mic's muted. Yeah.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question s'adresse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Aylward. Mr. Aylward, what I understand from what that you've said is that the Canadian Public Service would have been able to administer this program, according to you, at least. My question is the following. Was someone asked to give an opinion on this before the contract was given to We Charity? Were you part of discussions with the PMO or with Cabinet where you were asked if you were able to administer that program?
Consultation at all, and I've checked with the members that we have at ESDC, and as far as I know, none of my members anyways were consulted either.
Et le cas échéant, si
if there would have been a management contract for the public service, would there have been enough people to do the work, to your knowledge, in the public service?
Say absolutely yes, for sure, without a question.
Je dois comprendre que si on vous avait donné...
Then I understand that if you had been asked in April to administer this program, now in July, a lot of things would have been done already.
Yes, thank you. And that's exactly the point here, is that this was decided in April. It was announced in June, and here we are in mid-July, and there's still no real true program. And as I said, that's unfortunate. But if the public service had been asked in April to do this, if they could do it, I think the answer would have been yes. And I think you would have seen the program well underway by now, and students benefiting from this program.
Merci, Monsieur Aylward. J'aurais une autre question.
Thank you, Mr. Aylward. I have another question for Mr. Mandryk. Mr. Mandryk, you are a lawyer in the area of labor. You know a lot about internships and not-for-profits. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understood you well, you are skeptical about the idea of paying volunteers for work, as in this case. And I heard you talk about reimbursing certain expenses or giving little gifts. Do I understand you well if I say that, according to your expertise, it's not inappropriate to pay a volunteer?
Payment for work is antithetical to volunteering. I think that when organizations give payments to volunteers or some sort of reward to volunteers, they need to be extremely careful about that. But I think that the scope of the debate of acceptable sorts of payments or reimbursements or honoraria are things like, giving someone a bus pass, or, if you volunteer at a festival, giving you a pass so that you can attend that festival, or, in some cases, folks might be provided very modest honoraria to reflect their expenses. But that's the scope of what the debate range is. It's not, $5,000 payments.
Si je prends l'exemple.
Let me take the example of a person who wants to help because of COVID-19, and because someone who has the possibility either of working for a minimum wage or to receive a $10 an hour salary. According to your expertise, isn't the program counterproductive? Does this not discourage people from volunteering and or finding a work that is paid according to legal standards?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's also the concern about the displacement effect, where this may be potentially displacing paid jobs. So, there's a number of concerns that this raises in terms of its impact on the labor market and in terms of its impact on volunteerism.
Diriez-vous que c'est...
So then, would you say that that kind of a program would be counterproductive?
Yes, I believe that students should have been provided support for paid work, and if support was going to be given to the charitable sector, a different approach should have been taken. And from what I can see, and from what I've heard from folks in the sector, that this was not what they were asking for.
Last question, Mr. Fortin.
Yes, I still have time for one question. Thank you. Mr. Mandryk, one final question. Do you or someone from the labor law environment were you consulted, let's say, back in April and forward-looking as to the implementation of that kind of a program? Do you know someone who was consulted on setting up that kind of a program?
I was not consulted by the government. I'm not aware of anyone who was. If I had been consulted, I would have raised these very serious concerns about the impropriety of this sort of an arrangement.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Mr. Julian and then onward to Mr. Cummins. Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses for being here today. We hope your families are safe and healthy. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Aylward, and thank you very much to all of the public servants across the country that are doing such amazing work in the midst of this pandemic. Mr. Aylward, I'll start off with a very simple question. One of the very worrisome aspects of this case is the fact that we submitted a proposal the same day that it was announced, and high-level public servants, Ms. Warnick in her testimony last week, said that they were unaware of the details of the program, yet we was able to submit something the very same day that was announced by the Prime Minister. In your experience with public servants, have you ever seen this case where an organization submits the very day that the details become public?
No, I mean, normally the procurement system doesn't allow for that. Normally it's a very erroneous, not erroneous, sorry, but a very labor-intensive process that you have to go through for any kind of contracting out. I mean, there's requests for proposals and all of this. So this was somewhat unusual for sure.
Yeah, they sort of provides the same kind of worry, concern that comes up when we talk about insider trading. Now, none of the the testimony that we've heard so far actually suggests that we would in any way be keeping to privacy laws, accountability, things like bilingualism, all of the federal laws that actually govern what should be federal programs. Is part of your concern that issue of accountability and all of the laws that govern public servants and our public sector would simply don't seem to be involved at all in this sole source granting of money to we?
Yeah, certainly the appearance of that is there, along with, of course, labor standards as well. Including, if I work more than 100 hours, I'm going to get $1,000. If I work anything more than that, but less than 200, that's all I'm going to get. So again, it's a little bit, as I said in my statement, ironic when the government puts in, conditions under the Canada Labour Code for unpaid internships, and then yet expects students to basically work for nothing as well.
Yes. Now, the part of the controversy is around the $43 million that would have gone directly to we. We know that the public service has been underfunded. The Phoenix system, for example, is something that should have been fixed years ago, and yet the resources have not been put into place to fix the Phoenix system for our hardworking, dedicated public servants. What would $43 million mean in terms of actually providing supports to our existing public sector? And secondly, for Canada Summer Jobs, cruelly underfunded in my neck of the woods and right across the country. We have so many positions that people have applied for that can't be met because there's not adequate Canada Summer Job funding for students. What should the government have done? Should they have made that decision to invest that money in Canada Summer Jobs, like so many people are saying across the country?
Look, nobody is disputing that students need help at this time. They need assistance. I think everyone agrees with that. And I think this money, including the $43.5 million, could have been much better spent towards students, including paying students for work and providing them not only with income opportunities, but as I said, also work experiences as well. That everybody would have benefited from that for sure.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go on to Mr. Mandryk. Mr. Mandryk, you've pointed out all of the liability issues. What could the consequences be when a government puts into place that obviously we're hearing systematically that there was no due diligence done either on the organization or on the consequences? What would the liability potentially be to the federal government to simply have this unfair structure, exploitation of students, as you've said? And one of the components was teachers being paid to recruit students. What would the liability in employment law be for the teachers that I suspect would have had to in some way get around privacy laws to contact their students to recruit them for this program? I guess what we're looking for is the overall liability consequences of pushing ahead with this program without the due diligence being done at any level, it appears.
Yeah, so that's another important liability piece to this. The direct agencies that are getting the work, they could be on the hook as employers, and there could be wages, overtime, things like that they'd have to be responsible for. And then the government could be tied in a number of ways. It could be tied in, like I said, it could be a common employer. As you alluded to, there could be negligence claims potentially. There could be allegations that it was acting as a sort of labor supply company, given its role in acting as the paymaster. And then you raise an interesting and an important point about what could the potential liability be for others involved in this. And I think that's a real concern, and something that this program raises. It adds to the many concerns with the program as structured.
Last question, Mr. Julian.
Yes, so overriding minimum wage laws, both you and Mr. Alward have pointed to that. What are the consequences for overriding provincial minimum wage laws that have been set up to protect workers of any age, whether they're students or not, right across the country? What kind of liability and what kind of legal consequences could be engendered from that overriding of those minimum standards?
Yeah. So first of all, it's interesting. The federal government here is initiating this program, but these are workers that are under provincial employment standards. So it's it's the provincial employment standards that would presumably apply, and the federal government can't do away with that. These positions have to comply with provincial employment standards, and if these folks are found to be employees, these workers would be entitled to minimum wage, overtime, etc. There could also be administrative penalties that could be put in place against those involved, and those vary somewhat province to province. But certainly, there's real potential liability issues under provincial employment standards legislation.
What a mess!
Thank you both. We'll turn to Ms. Cummings and then go on to Ms. Kotrakis, who's sharing her time with Mr. Gerritsen. Mr. Cummings.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll start off with Mr. Alward. So the public service often works with not-for-profits, and I don't think there's anybody debating here that the not-for-profits do fantastic work in this country. But do you not find this incredibly unusual that a charity like WE, which has a very specific mission and it works in a very specific area, was selected to be doing a broad-based program with volunteer engagement with students? It strikes me as incredibly unusual.
Yes, thank you. And I can do nothing but agree with you. It is extremely unusual when you look at the timing and everything else about this.
And further to that if they were so equipped to get this done, then why $40 million? And then it was recently announced that they've been laying people off because they've had to hire people to be able to execute the program. So I'm just perplexed as to why WE and why not a variety of the other programs that we currently have in place that you've already spoken to.
You are no more perplexed than I am, Mr. Cummings, for sure. It is very perplexing as to how this whole thing transpired from the creation in April to the announcement in June. And as I said, here we are 3 months later, and still really no concrete program out there in place. And I would suspect that it is going to be turned over to ESDC to do this program, and that's what it should have happened in the first place.
But the problem with that now, it's a little late. It's middle of July. So, the students, by the time you execute on a program, I believe you've got the capacity to do it. But we're running out of, it's a very short window. Students are going back to school.
It's never too late to make it right. And hopefully this will be done right and done by federal public sector workers.
Yeah. So if it's been shown that many people in government have had some association with WE and the work that WE does, but that shouldn't override the importance of that whoever is selected should be able to deliver a broad-based program outside of their mission. So public service, often you'll work with Red Cross or you'll work with United Way when they have the capacity to work into whatever their expertise is. And this doesn't look to be the case in this particular situation.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mandryk, thank you for coming today. And I, like probably you, have spent a lot of time volunteering during my career. And this, again, looks to me like a program that is completely misdesigned. Give me a definition. I think you already did it to a certain extent. To me, the act of volunteering is volunteering. This idea of providing a stipend or a grant takes it away from being a volunteer. You're actually paid. So can you just give me by definition how you would define a volunteer?
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, like yourself, I volunteer a lot. And just to be clear, volunteering exists. It's something that is important to our society. And I'm not suggesting that. But like I said, there is a difference between a true volunteer and a misclassified employee. Unfortunately, there's not really any statutory guidance on this. and many of the cases are old, but generally speaking, there's a few points. So if someone's volunteering, it's going to be in the advancement of a civic or charitable or religious or humanitarian purpose. I'd also suggest that volunteering is not going to happen for a private for-profit company. But then, as you alluded to, I think that volunteers are folks that are performing this work for civic or charitable or other purposes without the expectation of remuneration. And there's a number of other factors that some of the cases have looked at, such as the extent to which the person performing the service views the arrangement as being in pursuit of their livelihood, the extent to which the agency receives a benefit from their students, and also looking at how the arrangement was initiated and the power imbalance between them. And so there's not a clear outline in the law. I mean, a lot of these cases are old. They're from before I was born. They're from before the rise of unpaid internships. And I think it's an open question as to how a court would address this question right now. But it is a bit of a smell test in figuring out what's a true volunteer. And certainly when you have a program structured that directly links the payment of money to the hours that you work, that to me does not look like volunteering.
You have a quick one there, James?
Yeah, so there's nothing that would stop students if they're on an existing program. So for example, the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit or a variety of other programs within the government, or even if you're under the Canada Summer Jobs Grant, to stop you from volunteering. You can still volunteer, you're just not paid for it.
Of course, and folks should volunteer, and they do. And as we heard yesterday from Ms. Spivak, students volunteer at extremely high rates. But what we don't want to see is volunteer misclassification and the mistreatment of workers who are being improperly classified as volunteers and being paid sub-minimum wage rates.
Okay, thank you both. Ms. Kotrakis splitting time, and then on to Mr. Poilievre on the next question list. Ms. Kotrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to also add my voice and to acknowledge the incredible work that is being done by our public service to quickly and effectively deliver all our COVID-19 economic response programs. And as everybody knows, all these programs were designed to help people as quickly as possible and to make sure that no one was left behind. As my colleague, Ms. Derowitz, noted earlier, the Canada Student Service Program is one of 4 such programs, and no one is disputing the fact that the public service is not capable of delivering this program. What we are saying is that under these unprecedented times, we were looking to help students, charities, and their clients during a pandemic and economic collapse. So, just to put that on the record. My question is for Mr. Aylward. There has been some concern that the public service may lack the connections to smaller local charities that We Charity had. These connections appear to be a primary reason why We Charity was chosen to deliver the programs. Can you respond to these concerns and comment on how the public service may work around these challenges, and also given the fact that many were working from home?
Yeah, thank you. I think as you've just said, the public servants, including those working from home, are able to deliver these programs seamlessly. So when we say that, I don't know what the basis of the statement is when you say that, we don't have the capacity within the public service to reach out to those charitable organizations at the ground level. As been said by several speakers now, the federal government is constantly working with charitable organizations. So again, is the capacity there within the federal public service to reach out to those charitable organizations? I certainly believe so.
Okay. And what do you say to many, we've heard that perhaps many of the public service employees themselves may be facing some health challenges given the workload and the speed with which other programs they are administering and had to be rolled out?
Absolutely. Look, I think this pandemic has put everybody certainly under just that little bit more pressure. working from home and having to still be very productive and still deliver programs, without the opportunity of walking, down the hall or walking down one flight of stairs to see, to talk to your coworker, to get a different kind of perspective. I mean, it's very difficult. A 5-minute conversation in the office is now turning into a 1-hour video conference, unfortunately. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I've heard from our members that it is very stressful. It's extremely stressful, but yet they still want to be productive. And I'll just give you an example. When the CERB was created, when the Emergency Response Benefit was created, the commissioner of the Canada Revenue Agency, Mr. Hamilton, in effect the deputy minister, put out a request for volunteers. He said, I need volunteers regardless of what job you're doing. I need volunteers to administer the CERB, and you're going to be in a call center environment, basically asking questions. And he said, I need 1,000 volunteers. 7,000 employees of the Canada Revenue Agency put up their hand and said, I will volunteer to do that work. So yes, you're right. I mean, it is very stressful times for everybody, including federal public sector workers, trying to be very productive at home. But the federal public sector workers are very proud and very dedicated of the work that they do. Absolutely.
Over to Mr. Gerritsen, and we'll likely have time for another question at the end. Mark, Mr. Gerritsen.
Thanks. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You get about a minute and a half.
Okay. Mr. Mandryk, you commented on the fact that you thought the Canada Summer Jobs Program could administer a lot of the funds instead of doing it through this volunteer program. Do you know if the capacity exists? Because in my riding, we were getting money sent back because businesses literally didn't have the capacity to continue with the program.
I'd suggest that many of these positions, if they look like jobs, they should be treated as jobs.
Okay, so but you don't know for a fact then. I did want to touch on something else. You said that you've commented and you've made your position very clear on this. Did you ever make this position known going back to when the government first started talking about the fact that they were going to do this? I mean, it's been a few months before the whole we part developed that the government said that they were going to be doing this.
I'm a citizen, so I've
but I mean, like,
I guess I've
you're
about this point, but
you are fairly active. You are fairly active on Twitter, and I mean, you didn't make a comment to this effect on Twitter. But I did just have one question for you. On July the 11th, you retweeted a tweet that said the We movement is in the Canadian public schools, teaching their corporate-sponsored approved neo-colonial nonsense to teachers and kids. I think it's safe to say you're not a fan of We from the outset. I just want to understand what your position is on We outside of this, notwithstanding your position on this issue.
I'll give Mr. Mandryk equal time to answer there. Go ahead, Mr. Mandryk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been very careful today to try and not talk about the we portion of this, because I don't think that that's what my concern is about here. There are experts who have spoken about that, the participants involved in that who have spoken about the appropriateness or not of giving this to we. I'm actually trying to stay out of that fray, because my concerns go so far beyond whether we administers it or whether the public service administers it. It's really about the core of this program and about the issues around the exploitation of students and young workers that it raises. So whether it's we or any organization, but I mean, certainly I have my own criticisms of that organization, but they're separate and aside from this, and not what I'm here to talk to you about today.
Okay, we'll go on to Mr. Poilievre and then on to Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. Poilievre.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Aylward. First of all, Mr. Aylward, thank you to you and your members for the extraordinary work that the public service has done during this pandemic. It is a real testament to their commitment and professionalism. And though we don't always agree with the government's policies, we do commend those who have given an oath to loyally deliver the programs, and your members have done that. So please give them our thanks. Are you aware, Mr. Aylward, of any federal program that provides students with some compensation for working at nonprofits and or charities?
There are a number of programs currently being administered for students by the Federal Public Service that's does that type of work. I would defer to my technical expert who's with me, my technical resource, Mr. West, if he is on the line, if he could provide a better answer to that. Howie?
Mr. West, go ahead if you're there. Howie?
Okay, maybe Mr. West is not with us, which is okay. Mr. Poilievre, I can't give you specific programs that would do that, but as I said, I mean, I do know that there are several programs administered within the federal public service that address student issues.
And Mr. Mandryk, very quickly, any programs that come to mind for you?
And sorry, the question is programs that
basically provide some federally backed compensation or wage subsidy for students to help not-for-profits or charities.
Yeah, some of the existing programs do that. They'll provide subsidies to the not-for-profits and charities for the full value of those young workers' wages in order to hire them as employees.
And what program comes to mind?
I believe that's the Canada Summer Jobs Program that does that.
Summer Jobs Program. And that program has existed for at least 15 years, to the best of my recollection. I've never heard any complaints about it. So why wouldn't, if the government just wanted to help cover some compensation for young people to help charities and not-for-profits, why not just boost that program?
I think that's a great question. And if you do the math on this, it sort of boggles my mind because it seems that the money is there. If you consider that we heard testimony that they were trying to make upwards of 100,000 positions, up to 500 hours per position, you figure if you paid those folks at $15 an hour, which is the highest minimum wage in Canada, so these folks would be making at or above minimum wage, that's about $750 million. It leaves a whole lot of money for administration. You could even pay them a bit more than that if you wanted. So it really boggles my mind that it had to be this way. And it's interesting because it seems that because they didn't pay these workers properly, so much of this money had to be put into things like getting teachers to recruit people or getting the agencies to promote it. I think if you had just paid people a decent wage, you would have avoided a lot of those challenges.
Does it suggest that the fact that there are pre-existing programs that are well administered for by our public servants and well understood by our charitable sector, and that those programs were discarded in favor of this directed contribution agreement, does it suggest to you that this entire $912 million contribution agreement was really created for the benefit of the We Charity rather than the We Charity getting involved for the benefit of students?
I can't comment on that. I don't know the answer to that. All I can say is, as I said earlier, I'm not sure why the program was structured the way that it was when it seems that there could have been other options, such as simply paying these workers a fair wage within the existing funding envelope.
Right. Okay. Last question.
Yeah, last question, Pierre.
At this point, Mr. Aylward, would you suggest on behalf of your members that this money just be directed to some sort of extended version of the Canada Summer Jobs Program so that students can get some wage assistance to help charities and not-for-profits? Would be a decent off-ramp from a public policy point of view, given where we're at?
Yes, for sure, or simply turn this program over to ESDC.
Right. Yeah, and that's I think you make perfect sense. I was the minister over there for a time, and I remember they had programs that they administered just like this, and they could very easily do it again. Thanks very much. All the very best.
Thank you both. We'll turn to Mr. Fragaskatis and then on to Ms. Goodrow, and I think we'll be able to get through the complete list of questioners. And Elizabeth, if you want on, you will have time later. Mr. Fragaskatis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. How much time, Mr. Chair, just to confirm?
You got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mandryk, you did make a reference earlier that under legislation, as we know, employment standards are largely looked at the provincial level, but under legislation, we don't really have an understanding of what constitutes a volunteer. For example, I'm in Ontario, so the Employment Standards Act of the year 2000, passed in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, does not really define what a volunteer is. However, the policy and interpretation manual does. It does offer a distinction. Do you have any thoughts on that distinction?
Yeah, I made some reference to some of the factors that some of these older cases have looked at. So the Ontario Policy and Interpretation Manual cites a few cases from before I was born. They're before the rise of unpaid internships, and they're before the statutory response to unpaid internships. So I think that it's not clear to me that the same response would be given now, but certainly when you have compensation being given to individuals on an hourly basis that's directly tied to their work, that raises serious red flags about whether it's true volunteering.
Let me just quote directly from the interpretation manual. It says as follows: one of the key factors in determining whether there has been a true volunteering of services is the extent to which the person performing the services views the arrangement as being pursuant to his or her pursuit of a livelihood. So at any point did you see in the description of the Canada Student Service Grant the government advertise this as a job?
I actually was surprised by the carelessness in some of the government's communications regarding this program. If you look at the announcement that was put out on June 25th, it did talk about, them getting I don't have the exact words, but it did seem to talk about, this is coming up because students are having trouble finding jobs.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my time is limited. I'm quoting directly from the interpretation manual, the manual that interprets the Employment Standards Act in the province of Ontario. At any point, did you see in the program description of the Canada Student Service Grant, the program described as a job, one that students could rely upon for their livelihood?
No, but it was clear.
Okay,
but it was clear that it was because students were doing this to get the money, and because there was a crisis for jobs and financial security for students happening right now. And students who do it would be doing it to get $5,000. So that's a real problem.
Let's take it one step.
Peter, we just let Mr. Mandryk finish first. Go ahead, Mr. Mandryk. Are you complete?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's take it one step further. In fact, in the way that the program eligibility is described, students who are receiving the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, which offers as much you could get up to $2,000 under that benefit, are eligible. In addition, students who are employed are also eligible for the Canada Student Service Grant. So I think it's important to, and I know this is your area of expertise, obviously, I'm not an employment lawyer, but it's clear that the interpretation manual clearly identifies a distinction between an employee and a volunteer. That distinction is the one that I have read. That is the key criteria in terms of outlining a difference between the two. In my time that I have remaining, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Alward. Mr. Alward, you talked, and I forget which of my colleagues it was that put it to you, could have been Ms. Koutrakis, who raised the question about the public service and asking your view specifically about the public service being best placed, as you put it, to offer administration of the program. But this wasn't just a program that was meant to advertise a volunteer opportunity to student volunteers and to charity and not-for-profit organizations. The aim was to train volunteers. The aim was to make sure that they had the training that they needed so that they could go straight away into helping organizations on the front lines of the COVID-19 response. We've heard already at this committee, has an enormous network. They have a tie to 2.4 million students and a tie to 7,000 schools right across the country. So I put that to you because in the context that we're in this pandemic, public servants have been and shouldering an incredible burden, doing such a great job, but working from home, administering so many different programs and tending to all sorts of needs. Is it really unreasonable to think that a third party with such an enormous network could be relied upon to carry out the administration of this program?
I'm not going to speak to the capacity of We Charity. I
But the public service did not have that capacity, right?
Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. Ale will have to take time to answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Contrary to what you just said, there is capacity within the federal public service, absolutely. Unless somebody can demonstrate to me why the Prime Minister made that statement that We Charity was the only organization able to carry this out, then I'm sorry, but I will refute what you just said and say quite plainly, absolutely, within the federal public service, there is the capacity to carry out this student service grant.
To train perhaps as close to 180,000 students to train them to be volunteers so that they get immediately placed in organizations. The public service had that capacity to do that in the middle of COVID-19. Is that what you're saying?
There's certainly capacity within the public service to have done that, to have reached out to organizations on the ground.
Okay, we will have to end it there. Wouldn't be the first disagreement we've had at this committee, Mr. Aylward or Mr. Fragiskatis. Ms. Goodrow, you got about 3 minutes, and then Mr. Julian the same.
Excellent. Excellent, Mr. Chair. My 3 minutes will be addressed to Mr. Lapointe. Mr. Lapointe, I understand that you are a governance expert. You were president at OSBL. You wrote 2 books. You work at the University of Montreal. I'll try to slow down. I'm sorry. Former director of the Katimavik program. With all your expertise and with what we've heard from Mr. Mendrick, I would like to hear you more specifically on what we said, that what is happening right now is counterproductive with helping our youth and with the organization and the distribution. So I would like you to take a few moments to give us your opinion. We can see some negative impacts from the implementation of this program. First of all, the first thing that was raised is that we end up paying for volunteer work. I think that potentially it could hinder the aspect of volunteer work because charity organizations are promoting volunteer work to help the community, the country in general, and all of a sudden there is volunteer time which is paid. It kind of harms the principle. In my consultant practice, as you said, I was a director general for a Canadian organization at the level of the province of Quebec. During my whole career, I'm a teacher and I write books, and I'm in contact with many organizations as a consultant in Quebec, organizations that were, if you want, paralyzed by COVID and that are not able to answer the need to greet volunteers, to give them a framework and give them everything that volunteer work would give them normally. And Mr. Lapointe, with your expertise, with your pan-Canadian expertise, were you consulted by the Canadian government to get your opinion? No. This being said, the process that the government could have used, which would have been your suggestions? You have 20 seconds. Essentially, work with external parties. Canada is used to doing that. I was in charge of Katimavik 10 years ago, so I was one of those external players. What is particular right now is that such a big file was given to an organization, We Charity, which did not have all the qualifications. They were building strategic alliances with other organizations to have everything that they needed to accomplish the goal of the program. So they're saying that they don't have all the qualifications, all the elements. But that's a bit surprising. Thank you, Mr. Lapointe.
Thank you. Thank you both. We'll go to Mr. Julian, and just to finish up, there will be Mr. Barrett, Mr. McLeod, Ms. May, and Mr. Garrettson, and we will have time for one more official opposition in there somewhere. Mr. Julian, 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I must say I'm a little dismayed by some of the attacks against witnesses. Mr. Garrettson, I thought, was being quite inappropriate in his comments. I will also just reply to Mr. Fragiscatos and mention on July 9th, quoted by Radio News, YMCA and we say hundreds of volunteer jobs on government website were mistakenly posted after miscommunication error. And the article goes on to say there are hundreds, maybe thousands of student volunteer jobs that may not even exist, and they're being advertised on a government website. They were posted when the We Charity was administering the $900 million federal aid program. The YMCA says those positions were created by the We Charity, and they never agreed to host them. So there is constantly references to jobs involved in this scandal. I will go back to Mr. Mandryk, and I wanted to ask if there have been cases where employers have tried to get employees to volunteer their services, and then, subject to litigation, have been told that that is not something that they can do. Also, I'd just like, in one word, how you would describe this debacle with all the liability issues and all of the lack of due diligence that we see as we uncover the layers of this onion. Do you have one word that sums up your reaction to this program?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a mess. In terms of whether there's cases about this, as I mentioned a bit earlier, there are older cases involving volunteer misclassification. I'm aware of some arbitration cases from maybe 10 years back where a company tried to get its employees to volunteer, and it was or outside individuals to volunteer as well, and it was found to be bargaining unit work. But I'm not aware of a case like this where there's this large scale, highly structured program where we're talking about millions and millions of potential hours of work at $10 an hour or even less. I just don't think that that this sort of program is sort of contemplated by past cases dealing with volunteering, because this to me seems very clearly to be a problematic arrangement.
Thank you very much for that. And what we don't know is who is driving this. I mean, the whole lack of due diligence, the massive amount of money involved, the fact that students actually benefit less than having the investments made to Canada Summer Jobs. The more we ask questions, the more I think there are additional questions that come up in this absolute debacle. Mr. Aylward, I'd like to come back to the issue of contracting out. The fact that we have a professional public service, members of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, ready, willing to implement, already have the procedures in place, already know the protocols and how to proceed. What is the impact when the federal government contracts out such a massive program, $1 billion program, without any due diligence at all? And without any due regard to minimum wage laws, to labor standards, all of the things that we're talking about today?
Well, it's demoralizing to the members. It's demoralizing to the employees when they see that sort of thing happening. Would have it caused job loss? No, I wouldn't go as far as saying that. But still, to see work that is currently being done, very, very, very similar work for sure. I mean, there's obviously a priority there with the type of work, and to see that being contracted out, I mean, that is demoralizing for federal public sector workers to see that.
Back to 5-minute rounds. Mr. Barrett, followed by Mr. McLeod. Michael? Yeah. Can't hear you for some reason. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay, perfect. Let me just make sure that's okay. And I want to start by thanking Mr. Aylward and his members with respect to the administration of the Canada Summer Jobs program. in my riding of Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, I can tell you that the program was oversubscribed. It was launched. Late, and of course, with all of the due to a government announcement and with all the challenges of COVID-19, there were a lot of moving pieces. But there were a record number of employers that were approved, and we were absolutely flooded with applicants who were interested in applying. Unfortunately, the funds for the program were exhausted, and all of the approved employers did not receive placements, much to the disappointment of folks in my community, both on the prospective employee side and on the employer side. There are great challenges that exist with respect to filling employment positions. So I appreciate your testimony, Mr. Elwood. And I'm going to turn my first question to Mr. Lapointe. There are public reports, including an interview with the managing director of Charity Intelligence, that detail the sudden resignation or replacement of the board at the WE organization. In your experience in this sector, is that?
Dans votre expérience dans ce secteur, est-ce inhabituel? I would ask you to repeat the question because I tried to move to French and I missed what the interpreter said. I'm sorry.
Just if you could refer to the question part again, Michael. There was a problem with translation.
Okay. To Mr. Lapointe, there are public reports, including reporting on an interview with the managing director for Charity Intelligence, that detail the sudden resignation or replacement of nearly the entire board at the WE organization. In your experience, is this unusual?
La réponse, est-ce que c'est...
My answer, is this unusual? Yes, it is unusual, and it's a concern. If this information is true, that is, that all the members of a board resigned in a due diligence process, it's something that must be on the radar because the board has two roles, a strategic role, of course, but also a fiduciary role. One expects from a board a certain stability, a certain competency in order to make sure that the organization is well governed. Resignation of all members, not necessarily after agreeing, but resigning at the same time, is something that's rare and concerning.
And look at governance models for not-for-profits. Does that model typically include a for-profit arm and a not-for-profit arm of the same organization where the not-for-profit pays the for-profit for services?
A formula where there's a link between two organizations, one that's a charity and the other is not, is a model that exists. We see this occasionally. But I would underline one thing. The organization that is not a charity is not necessarily a for-profit organization. It could be another not-for-profit organization that has commercial activities in order to go and get funds to help the charity. I'm not saying this to mix things up, but the Me to We, is it a charity or not? What I'm saying is that for-profit organizations that have a link to charities is not a usual arrangement. What we have is that not-for-profit that is not a charity, but that is close to a charity.
Mr. Baird.
Okay. My last question again to Mr. Lapointe is for not-for-profits and their influencing of public policy, would they generally register as lobbyists? To Mr. Lapointe.
Mr. Lapointe, do you want to answer that?
Oui, la loi.
Answer. The Act on Lobbying stipulates that one who has important lobbying activities with government authorities, whether this person is in the profit or not-for-profit sector, in one case as in the other, the person must be registered. When I was the director of not-for-profits, I was registered as a lobbyist.
Thank you both. Turning to Mr. McLeod, followed by Elizabeth May. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to remember that this program came about as a need to assist the students. When the pandemic hit, there was so many concerns raised about not being able to help the students as they work towards saving some money to go back into school in the fall. And we also heard lots from the non-profit organizations that wanted to provide services and didn't have a lot of people to call on. And that includes some of the Indigenous governments in the community. So I think this was a good program. The idea behind it was great to deal with two issues that were challenging us. I certainly raised a lot of concern as an MP to the ministers. It's unfortunate and regrettable that these placements are now on hold. We're at July 21st. And, you know, there's a possibility we may not see either of these programs or these concerns dealt with. I certainly agree with Minister Cummings that we're running out of time. I really share that concern. To this day, I'm still getting calls from the communities in my riding for help to access some of the programs that we have announced. We have very limited in terms of public service in the northern communities. We have Service Canada offices, but a lot of times they're very busy. Our territories are still in a lockdown. We don't have offices in every community for federal government. There's limits on travel. So it's very difficult to access programs. So I'm hearing from municipalities, I'm hearing from community leaders that we need to create more positions to deliver these programs. And I also heard very clearly from Gina Wilson, the Deputy Minister that presented at our earlier committee on how public servants were working around the clock to implement the programs. And she listed a whole slew of programs that we've announced, and that there is concern about her members of the staff that are facing concerns about health. I think as people work from home, we're starting to see a backlog on delivery of programs. And I think outsourcing is a way to get it resolved. I see programs that were announced and are being delivered by United Way and the Red Cross that are out there. It's happening. So I'd like to ask Mr. Alward if he agrees that and he knows of what Gina Wilson was talking about and how his public servants are being challenged to deliver the many programs that were announced. That's my first question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. I mean, yes, absolutely. I would agree with you, as I have with other speakers, that workers are under a tremendous amount of pressure during this time for various reasons, of course. But the statement that there's a backlog of programs that can be delivered, I'm not too sure what the premise of that statement would be. I'm not aware of any backlog of programs that federal public sector workers have failed to deliver. As I said earlier, earlier. On the contrary, because of the programs that were necessary to introduce because of the pandemic, I think the public sector workers have delivered certainly very much on time programs when Canadians needed it the most. So if the deputy is saying that there's a backlog of programs, as I said, I'm not aware of the premise of that statement at all.
Yeah, thank you for that response. And maybe you could come and visit us in the North and see what our reality is. We have a great public service in the North, but the North is big. You know, there's quite a few communities, and they're spread out and they're remote. So it takes a lot of effort a lot of times to make sure everybody's able to access programs. I know many leaders in communities that are raising concern that they can't access some of the programs. And I've heard, including yourself, that people have stepped up to volunteer to answer phones and more. And I'm not sure what training has happened in light of that need for people to evolve as public service, to move into different positions. Can you maybe elaborate how is that happening and how is that taking place?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the North is my favorite part of this country, Mr. McLeod. Let me make it very clear. We represent over 15,000 workers in the North, including, of course, the government of Northwest Territories, the Yukon government, and the government of Nunavut. So I've visited the North many times, and as I said, it's my favorite part of the country. Being a Newfoundlander and Labradorian, that's difficult to say, but there you go. I've said it. So to answer your question, though, specifically, is that yes, I mean it's our members are under pressure for sure, and many have volunteered to do work that they cannot do at home because of their job description, and they've agreed to do work outside of their job description. They've certainly agreed to step up and do work outside the normal working hours. Many of our members, have said, I have small children at home because of the closure of schools and daycares and so on. I have small children at home. I can't work my normal 8 to 4 or 7 to 3. I can start work, though, at 4:30. That's when my partner is available to take care of the kids. So I can start work at 4:30 and work through the evening because, as I said earlier, they want to be productive. And many of the members of the Public Service Alliance of Canada have gone and continue to go above and beyond what they're asked to do for Canadians in this time. So absolutely, yes, they're doing different duties than what they would have normally done to assist Canadians, and they're certainly working, as I said, outside of the core hours because they're unable to work the core hours. So absolutely, everything that they can do possibly to be productive.
Can I just ask you before we run out of time? Is it your expectation that the public service will deliver the program now as it was expected to be delivered by the We Charity, with a full range of services to promote, to match people with services, to create partnerships with other organizations? Can the public service provide that level for what we were expecting from?
We are at a time, Michael, but we'll allow an answer. Go ahead, Mr. Aylward.
Nobody has convinced me otherwise, Mr. McLeod.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I do think it is interesting with people working the different hours and working from home that productivity has increased. I think there's some lessons learned here, Mr. Aylward, going forward that we need to pay attention to, I guess is what I'm thinking. Ms. May, 5 minutes, and then Mr. Garrison, 5, and we'll wrap it up there unless there's a burning question from someone. Ms. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's my first opportunity to weigh in on the topic du jour of our WE scandal. I wanted to, first of all, thank the public service for all the work over the last number of months. It's been extraordinary. And my own personal frame on this is the WE scandal is troubling. But when you think about all the things that were rolled out and the pace at which they were rolled out, inevitably there was going to be one major giant snafu. And this is it. And it's at an ethical level, it's at a programmatic level, it's at a lot of different levels. But I want to set it aside because I think as a sometime guest to your finance committee, I want to concentrate on what we do now with the urgency that the days of summer are dwindling. How do we get the jobs for students? And although I'm very supportive of the public service and would love to ask Mr. Alward more questions, and I may get time to do that. I wanted to go to Mr. Mandryk, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
You are, yes.
Back to the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Some of my colleagues in committee have said they didn't know if there was capacity. Share my own experience and then ask you for a response. I've talked to my colleagues in the Green Caucus, Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin. We all had unfunded possible jobs at a large number. So, for instance, we had employers who asked for 16 positions over the summer and were granted 4 because of budget constraints, or they asked to have students for 8 weeks, but there was only money for 4 weeks. So in kind of our back of the envelope estimates, each of us would have about $500,000 worth of existing improved employers in the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and the potential to get those students those jobs fairly quickly. So in terms of delivering jobs for students, I know you've already said you favor using the Canada Summer Jobs Program, but could you suggest how, is there anything comparable to the Canada Summer Jobs Program at this last moment? And are there any of the issues that you raised of concern about the proposed We Charity approach that would, in terms of whether the jobs are real, whether there are any employment issues, are there any issues at all that you've seen with Canada Summer Jobs?
Yeah, so like others have alluded to, we're starting to run out of summer. So in terms of time for students to get into these positions, there are limits in terms of what we can do now. I can't speak to individual employment issues across countless positions. I no doubt that there are some, but I also hear lots of great stories about the success of the program and the opportunities that it gives to young folks. And I think that if we're going to put money towards supporting students and giving them work opportunities, that it ought to be through those existing programs that support paid jobs that comply with employment standards and help advance the careers of these young folks.
Can you think of any way in which the Government of Canada, because I'm a big fan of volunteerism, I come from the NGO sector. I was a volunteer most of my life. I still do volunteer gigs now and then on different things where people need volunteers. I was mostly a volunteer through my 20s in the work I was doing in the environmental movement, and through my 30s. And then I ended up running a big national environmental organization where we relied on thousands of volunteers. So I love the idea of promoting volunteerism. Can you think of any way that at this point we could have a program that was compliant with employment laws that encouraged young people to volunteer and provided some form of acceptable recognition, shall we say, as opposed to salary?
Yeah, I think the government can encourage volunteering all that it wants. I think that a program of this type, where it mandates it in exchange for compensation and ties it to hours, is deeply flawed. I think that the way that this program is salvaged is not going to be through continuing with these positions as volunteer positions. And I'd also just add that there's other ways that the charitable NGO sector can be supported. Ms. Spivak spoke to some of those last day, and certainly this was not what I can see most of the folks in the sector were calling for. They were calling for different support.
Thank you. And I just hope we can all focus on what we do for students now, and our normal partisan instincts to beat up on shooting fish in a barrel on a scandal can be set aside at least long enough to make sure the students get jobs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't think there's an answer to that one, Mr. Gerritsen, and I believe it's Peter who has a final question. Peter Julian. Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And given what Mr. Julian had said earlier, I did want to take the opportunity, Mr. Mandryk, to apologize if you thought that I was coming across as though I was being too aggressive, as Mr. Julian indicated. The reality is I was just trying to understand if you had a formed opinion on we outside of this particular issue. Did you want to add anything to make sure that you have the opportunity to set the record straight on that?
No, I can handle the rough play here, but just to clarify, my concerns with this program and those that I've spoken about today are deep, fundamental, structural flaws with the program that go beyond whether we was involved in it or not, and that's what I've tried to focus on today, and that's what the government needs to focus on in order to try and fix and salvage this program.
Fair enough. You said that when I asked you earlier, I said, why didn't you say anything before? And you said, well, I'm a regular citizen. Fair enough. You're also an expert in this field. You're on the Standing Committee of Parliament for Finance. You're here as a witness. You're here as a witness on the Standing Committee. Why? I'm just curious why you didn't take a position before when the government had announced a few months ago that they were going to roll out this program.
Well, it looks like your staffers have scrolled carefully through my Twitter. I didn't.
No, that was me
today. So maybe I could go back and find some of my tweets about this point. But in the past weeks, I've spoken with a number of journalists about this. I was very happy to take the opportunity on to participate here. I've talked with colleagues and others. I'm also a very busy lawyer that has a practice, and I work 55 hours a week, and it's a pandemic. So there's all sorts of reasons.
Fair.
I'm here now for the questions that you have, sir.
That's great. And I just think that information would have been so much more relevant before, regardless of whether it was we or another organization earlier on for a finance committee to consider. But I'll just go to Mr. Alward for a second. I just wanted to take the opportunity, as I know other colleagues have said, that, I too want to add my voice to the chorus of people that are singing the praise of our public service. The reality of the situation is this, sir. We went from the World Health Organization declaring a global pandemic to having money in the bank accounts of 5.4 million people in a month and 4 days. And the reality is you can have all the politicians come up with all the great ideas that they might have, but if you don't have such a dedicated public service that is willing to work overtime, willing to do what's necessary to deliver on that, the program would have never happened. So politicians come and go. It's our public service that is the backbone and their institutional knowledge that helps to deliver that. So thank you. And please, I hope that you share back with the public service the position that I believe all committee members have on this. I wanted to ask you, why do you think that the senior public management made the decision that outsourcing was the only option?
Honestly, Mr. Gerritsen, I can't answer that in a very honest way. All I can tell you is that I know I've checked with our members at ESDC to see if anybody there was consulted, and to my knowledge, nobody there was spoken to about, okay, there's a new program. Do we have the capacity? Can we do this? How effective, how efficiently we can do this? I know that wasn't discussed with any of my members, to my knowledge, anyway. So why that decision was made? I can't answer that. I mean, it's a question that I've asked as to who has made the determination that we don't have the capacity within the federal public service to deliver this program.
So as a lesson learned, I guess you're saying that we need to make sure that question is asked in the future.
I believe so, just like it should have been asked during the introduction of the Phoenix Pay system, where the unions and the workers should have been. As
you would know, Kingston and the Islands has a lot of public servants, yes. And we are very familiar with that program. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Mr. Gerritsen, because I know that you have met with many of members of the PSAC, and I thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both. Turning to the last round will be Mr. Julian, and you'll wrap it up.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have two questions for Mr. Lapointe. Mr. Lapointe, you've raised the fact that this program does not correspond or does not at all meet the federal legislation. For instance, privacy laws, the issue of transparency, bilingualism, and so on. When something is put into place by the Federal Public Service, the Federal Public Service abides by all federal legislation. So what do you think about giving this to contracting this out when it comes to this laws, bilingualism, privacy, etc. Anything and everything that has to do with transparency that usually come into play when we're talking about public funds?
Avec mon expérience.
Well, my experience of these agreements, these contribution agreements, has concluded between the government and an independent third party, whatever the organization. Well, in these contracts, and they're very thick. There are many, many pages. I've signed a few in my lifetime. Well, all legislation, all regulations are raised and dealt with, whereby the organization that is receives the work has to abide by the legislation. But I do not know what is the content of the contribution agreement that was discussed with We Charity, but usually that is the case in terms of abiding by legislation. And so in that case, or in the specific case rather, is that we don't know. We don't know what was discussed. But what we've seen in recent days, as you know, this is the second day of hearings on the matter, is apparently there wasn't a process whereby information was checked. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what was signed off. And the second question that I want to put to you would be the following, and thank you to the chair for giving me the opportunity to do so. Mr. Lapointe, do you share the concerns of raised by others having to do with exploiting young Canadians, in that we're not speaking to the minimum wage or even hours of work standards across the country? Mr. Lapointe, these concerns are certainly relevant, but before we actually deal with those, it seems to me it was capital from the outset that it is breaking the true meaning of volunteerism, that a certain number of volunteer hours would be paid certain amounts of money, and they're not symbolic. As others have said today, it can occur that organizations where there are a great many volunteers, it can happen that volunteers get some kind of reward, but it's very symbolic. Free coffee, for instance, or an annual party, or something like that. But to actually link volunteer work with a type of compensation, even if it's a lump sum, even if it's $1,000, $2,000, or even $5,000, well, before we talk about applicable legislation, are we trying to circumvent labor law, for instance? Well, before we deal with that, there is the matter of principle that needs to be dealt with first. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. And certainly I want to thank all the witnesses for coming today and taking the time and answering our questions. I know you're all busy people in these times. Certainly, there's some disagreements, but I've always found disagreements often lead to better public policy. So there's not a problem with having some disagreements, at least before this committee. Just for a heads up for members, tomorrow will be a bit of a different day. In that we will have our regular meeting from 12 Ottawa time to 2. Then we will suspend for an hour and have Mr. Marneau from 3 Ottawa time to 4. I understand he has to be at, I think, question periods from 2 to 3. But in any event, so it'll take us 4 hours to do 3 hours a meeting. That's not efficient, I guess, but it's what it'll be. So with that, thank you all once again. Meeting adjourned. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.